This year's discussion on the state of college sports is going to be a little bit different. Bud mentioned that we've changed the title of it because it's not in the beginning of a business session right now. But, I think it's fitting that it's different because, candidly, the world's a kind of different place right now than it was a year ago, but it's certainly a really different place than it was 5 years ago or even 10 years ago. And some of those things are good and some of them are challenging. But one of the things that I think we would all recognize about the world around us right now is that we've got higher levels of doubt and cynicism and anxiety in our society about pretty much everything than I remember in my lifetime, and I'm one of the older people in the room. When we look at poll data about how people feel about their confidence levels in any institution, any organization, the church, the business community, the banks, the medical community, Congress, the media, they're all at record lows. And by the way, that includes higher education. At a time when the world needs an education more than ever before, never in our lives have people needed a college degree more than they need right now. Simultaneously, people are asking lots and lots of hard, sometimes cynical questions about higher education and certainly about college sports. And nobody escapes the scrutiny. Not sometimes painful scrutiny, let's be honest. Not big schools, not small schools, all divisions that are represented here, the national office, everybody. Everybody right now is under a spotlight in ways that are fundamentally different and fundamentally questioning who we are and what we do and what we stand for. Now, I know that everybody here, everyone in this room, knows the impact and the value of higher education and of the impact and value of participating in college sports. We see it every day. We see people like Julie. We see people like those wonderful young men and women we honored at the honors celebration last night. Every time we go through that celebration, everybody says, I so wish the media would report on this, because you look at those kids and you just think, oh my gosh, how wonderful is this? We get to see all the good stuff, all of us here. We see it every day. It's normal. But the broader world doesn't always see that. In fact, they don't see it anywhere near enough. I know you try on your campuses and your conferences. We try in the national office to get those stories out, but that's typically not what the world talks about and wants to see. And the dilemma for us here, as we try to deal with the challenges and issues of college sport today, are that we tend to, at least a lot of us do, I know I do, we tend to feel like we're being picked on, like people are just taking shots at us. Or we tend to say, well, it's not us, it's not me, it's that other school. They do some things over there that people pick on, or that other division over there, another sport. Our sport doesn't have those problems, that sport does. But the fact is that's just a little too convenient for all of us. It's a little too easy, and we kind of shrug it off sometimes. It's just, well, that's just life today. But the reality is that some of the criticism, not all of it, of course, some of the criticism is justified. Some of the criticism has a kernel of truth in it, even when it doesn't feel good. And we, in these meetings here, and as we go forward throughout 2018, we got to look those problems straight in the eye and be honest with ourselves. We owe that to our students so that we can make sure that this wonderful activity continues going forward. Now, when we see, as we saw last fall, the damning charges of the U.S. Attorney and the FBI come forward across all of our headlines, those scream way louder than any good story that we can put out there, because they have that kernel of truth underneath them. Scandals that call into question our commitment to academic integrity make whatever praise we have of our highest graduation rates ring pretty hollow. And we have to recognize that we can't dance around those things. We can't make excuses for it. We can't say, well, our process is slow and we're going to get to that. We got to stand up and recognize that nobody can stand by the side here. We're all in this one together. When we have issues like those, we have to stand up and say, yeah, that's a problem. We got to fix that. That doesn't mean everything else is bad, but it means we got to deal with the things that are real issues. How do we do that? How do we respond? Well, I think first of all, by not retreating from it, not getting under our desks, not hiding from it, by being forthright, and by being true to the words that we use when we talk about college sports. We talk about it all the time. I talk about it all the time. If we say it's all about opportunity for our students, then by golly, we ought to make sure it's all about opportunity for our students. If we say we're all about trying to make sure our students have academic success, then we got to make sure that's what we stay focused on. If we say it's all about fairness and making sure everybody's treated the right way, then we need to deliver on that. If we say we're deeply committed to our students' health and well-being, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure they're safe and healthy and strong, then we got to step up to the line and deliver on those things. Now, those are easy things to say, but we need to talk in this convention a little bit tonight, but throughout this convention, about just how we get on with that. One of the ways that we do it isn't by just talking to ourselves, it's also by listening, especially listening to those who matter most, and those are our students. I'm really pleased with what I've seen in my 7 years now in the changes that have been made in each of our 3 divisions and across the Board of Governors to incorporate the voices of our students into the deliberations and the discussions and the decisions that are made, not just their voices, but also their votes, so that they now have stronger voices today than ever before. Divisions 2 and 3 were a little bit ahead of Division 1. Division 1's now catching up, and last year, the Board of Governors created a Student Athletic Engagement Committee that's been making great strides in understanding what's on our students' minds. And I'm going to ask somebody to come up and talk for a little bit about that with me, and that's the inaugural chair of the Student Athlete Engagement Committee, and that's Alaina Wu. Alaina, please come on up. Welcome. Thanks. So, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us real quickly what you're doing these days.
I'm actually living in Boston. I graduated from Pomona College in Southern California, so I'm coaching basketball at Tufts, and I work as a research assistant. I studied public policy in college, so studying public policy and staying around basketball.
How's your team doing?
We're doing okay. Yeah, we picked up a couple recent losses, but
bad
we started
coaching, you think, or?
I think it's the new assistant that they have. But.
Well, look, we talk all the time about trying to stay connected to students, and I'd like to hear, how do you see that issue? How are we doing on that front?
I think when we think about staying connected, we have to think about our identities as student athletes, and I think especially the student athletes that are here at convention, I think I speak for most of the people in the room when I say that our identities as student athletes and our experiences are incredibly important to us. And so I think feeling like administrators and professors and the NCAA understands that is really important. And I think that's really the intent of the Student Athlete Engagement Committee. And I don't know if everyone in here knows, but there's student athletes from Division I, Division II, and Division III. And so I think it's an association-wide committee and kind of a rare opportunity for student athletes to have that direct line to the Board of Governors. And like I said, I was a public policy major, and I'm always surprised by how often people craft policies or make changes without actually engaging the people that they're making the policies for. And so I think it's so important that we engage student athletes as the NCAA moves forward, doing things that are going to directly impact student athletes.
Yeah, you do know that was my field when I was a professor.
Yes, I do.
Okay. We'll do a little quiz later. So, one of the things that I always found challenging on campuses, and I'm sure everybody here does, and we do inside the NCAA, is trying to have one group, big or small, represent the whole cross-section of college sports. There's 500,000 students. They come from every kind of background. They play every kind of sport. How do you make that work, and what in your background do you think allows you to do that?
Right. I think that's something that's really important, and I think we experience this as student athletes, but we especially experience this as students. I think you go off to college, and the idea is that it's going to be this dynamic, diverse experience where you're exposed to new perspectives. So I think even standing up here, it's hard for me to speak on behalf of all student athletes or even on behalf of the Student Athlete Engagement Committee, because everyone's experience is really different. I think we have found, though, that despite having Division I, Division II, and Division III athletes on this committee, that we've been able to find some common ground and some consensus, and I think that's really the job of the Student Athlete Engagement Committee, is to look at all the issues and to look at the diversity of experiences and decide, what should our priorities be.
Yeah. Related to that, again, I know from my own experiences here and on campus, especially right now, we all tend to, in the world of social media and kind of communication bubbles, we all sort of live in our own little self-referential communication bubble, I'm afraid to say. It's kind of hard to know what's really going on in the life of student athletes. We can read this or we can read that, but trying to really know what you guys care about and what's important is hard. Do you think you guys are getting at that and being able to communicate it?
Yeah, I think we're getting there, and I think you're kind of touching on something that we've talked a little bit about as a committee. I think there's so much information, it's easy to ignore, but I think really the intention and the priority of the Student Athlete Engagement Committee is to look at all that, and again, to decide, what of it is real and how is it being framed. Sometimes, you read about something and the content's incredibly important, but it's also, who is involved in this conversation and who's being left out of this conversation. And so I think there's a lot of important questions that we ask, and I think moving forward, we have to think really critically about all the information and the news cycles and social media and everything that's out there. And I think that's really a priority and a responsibility of the committee moving forward.
Good. So you're rotating off. This is your last hurrah. What's your hopes now that you've got 1 year, the committee's got 1 year under its belt? And what are your hopes for where this committee can go, and what would you like to see when you come back here with your national championship trophy?
Right. I mean, I think that there's a really wonderful group of student athletes who will continue to be on the committee. So there's only a couple of us rolling off. So I think we have a really good body of people who are willing and really wanting to engage with the Board of Governors. I think we've been working on a lot of the sexual violence stuff, and we were tasked that by the Board of Governors. But I do think moving forward, there is a lot of enthusiasm from the student athletes to propose topics and issues and things that are affecting them in their daily lives. So I think, it's going to be a two-way street. It's going to be, I sense a genuine enthusiasm from the Board of Governors to suggest things that they want feedback about from student athletes, but then also student athletes kind of taking the lead and taking the charge and suggesting to the Board of Governors, like, hey, these sorts of issues will really impact me, and I want to talk about them. So I think there's genuine enthusiasm on both ends, and I'm really excited to see the committee capitalize on that.
Good. Well, thanks for your good hard work, and we appreciate you being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So obviously, one of the things that's critical for all of us is staying close to our students, understanding their needs, their concerns, things they're happy about, unhappy about, and what their aspirations are. When we see in the news or elsewhere, that some group of students has, expressed sometimes in a very loud voice something that they're unhappy about, and someone didn't know about it in advance, you didn't realize that this was an issue, that's a failure on our part. We've got to make sure we know what's happening on our campuses and our conferences and across the national scene. And Alaina, what you guys are doing is a big help in the right direction, but we got to stay on top of it. I think the other piece of this that we've got to stay on top of, that's closely related, that's, again, something that I say a lot, is to constantly remind ourselves that we're ultimately in the human development business. People know us by our big sporting events, but we're in the human development business. That's what universities and colleges do, and we do sports as a part of that activity inside that context. And remembering that and reminding ourselves of that and making it happen often is really, really hard. And it's hard, I think, because in college sports, sports in general, but college sports in particular, there's these enormous pressures that are sometimes, not always, but sometimes contrary to what we're trying to do and some of the espoused beliefs that we talk about. So we're all under pressure to win a game, win a season, win a championship. Alaina's already got it booked. We're constantly under pressure to please alumni, donors, people that are supporting our school. As managers, we're always under pressure to balance a budget, figure out how to deploy scarce resources, how to generate resources. We're always under pressure to recruit more students or better students or a more diverse student body, and how do we do that while we're supporting also our sports programs? We're occasionally challenged by pressure to keep a kid on a field that maybe isn't feeling quite as good as she might want to feel. Those pressures just don't always line up with all of our professed values. And that's kind of hard, because then what happens is, slowly, incrementally, we can drift away from those professed values. A little bit here, a little bit there. It's rarely that we take some big juncture over here and jump. It's usually incremental stuff that gets us over in the wrong place. It's one thing, and we all know this, it's one thing to make a decision here at a convention in a committee meeting room or any other room in this building. It's an entirely other thing to make it stick on game day when there's pressure on you. We have to fight against that drift, because the core values of college sports are worth protecting. It's what allows 500,000 students to have the experience that they have. And holding tight to those values doesn't mean being out of touch, doesn't mean being rigid, doesn't mean clinging to some out-of-date concept. We've got to always keep current, but we can't abandon our values while we're doing it. I get frustrated about hearing, well, you know, you keep talking about values and gee, that value is outdated. I don't think that's true at all, but some of the ways we execute on that value could be outdated. And we can't run away from change. The change is all around us. It's everywhere. It's swirling now faster than ever before. Instead, we need to embrace it. We need to talk to our students, know what's changing in their lives. We need to watch what's changing in technology, see what's going on with the demographics of our student bodies in the future. We need to be the leaders in managing change, not getting whipsawed by it. That's something that's our responsibility, but we always have to do that by reminding ourselves that fundamentally, this is about providing opportunities for our students to succeed. And we have to shape, today's decisions, the one you're making this week, while staying true to those aspirations and those values, but we also have to think about where we're going downstream as this world is changing around us. In the midst of, that swirl, we've got to also plan, we've got to look forward, we've got to project. Now, predicting what we can, in terms of what we do know, and begin to consider how we might get ready for that change is a very difficult thing. But we know we can do this. If you look back, 15 years ago, this association came forward with a strategic plan, and it said, we got to look into the future. What are the things that are most important to us? And the consensus was, we've got to increase our graduation rates across all three divisions. We've got to be more effective at getting students into school and graduating out the other end, not just keeping them eligible. If you go back and you track from when that process began to where we are today, it is a very steep line of graduation rates. That planning process wasn't some abstract, arcane activity. It was very real, and it guided us for an extended period of time. Now, we know today there's a lot going on. Big demographic changes. The students in 5 or 10 years will not look like the students today. We know that culture is changing, society is changing, technology is changing. Some of those things are predictable, some of them aren't. But we need to ask ourselves, how is college sports going to fit into that environment in 5 years? That's sort of knowable. 10 years, getting kind of iffy out there. Beyond that, it gets pretty hard to project. So the bottom line is, we got to ask, how do we continue to guarantee opportunities to those 500,000 students, and how do we plan for it now? Not a bureaucratic exercise. So the Board of Governors has begun an effort just this year, and we've been talking about it in some of the meetings today, to start planning for the future by having another strategic planning process. And that's going to be led by President Glen Jones, and I'd like to ask Dr. Jones to please join me on the stage right now. So please join me in welcoming President Glen Jones from Henderson State University.
Awesome.
Good to have you. So, well, first of all, tell everybody about your academic background, because you're perfectly suited to this task.
I don't know about that much, but I spent many years as a professor of accounting. I got my first start in administration as assistant to the president for diversity initiatives. I got promoted along the way, ended up being provost prior to my coming to Henderson State University, which is my alma mater. So I've had a chance to be back home for 6 years now, leading our campus.
So why should we be doing this? I mean, most people, are kind of scratching their head saying strategic planning, that's a yawner. I mean, why do we do this, and what's it going to do for us?
Think about the fact that our last plan was done in 2004. It's 14 years ago. If you were to look at the Fortune 500 list for 2004, you'd find within the top 50, Kmart was number 32 that year, JCPenney was number 43. And there was a company that was struggling to regain its footing at number 301 called Apple Computers. You fast forward to this year's list, JCPenney is gone out of the Fortune 500. Sears is nowhere near number 32, and Apple, of course, has always been in the top 3 the past decade, and has always been the most profitable company in the world. If you look at 2004, the iPhone had not been invented, Facebook had not been founded, Instagram did not exist, YouTube did not exist.
You're saying that like it's a bad thing.
Yeah. Well, my point is, social media has changed everything. Android did not exist. It's changed the way we communicate, and quite frankly, I think it's changed the way we act. And as a result, now is a great time for us, as we looked at all the changes that have occurred in society, and you've talked about those. We're very cynical now. We're very anti-everything. And so I'd like to use this process as a time to really reestablish how we think, how we feel about this thing called the NCAA, to elevate the conversation surrounding it among ourselves first and foremost, but also to those external parties who don't quite believe in who we are and what we do. Also, I think if you look at the issues of the day, they just didn't exist 14 years ago. We weren't talking about diversity and inclusion. We were talking about affirmative action, but not diversity, and truly the benefits thereof. We weren't really taking seriously discussions surrounding sexual harassment. Online gambling did not exist. So all these things have come on the horizon, and I think they've resulted in the NCAA being on the defensive and being very reactionary. I want to use this as a process to really propel us into the role of a leader, and not just in terms of what we do within the association, but really bringing people together. And whether you're rich, poor, black, white, it doesn't matter. People tend to come together and root for the red team on Saturdays. They tend to come together, and for those 3 hours, 2 hours, whatever it may be, nothing else seems to matter. So how do we use that to elevate how people think and feel about the NCAA? So why now? Why not now? I think it's a great opportunity. I think society is looking for a leader, and I think that's what we do best. That's what all of us here do best. And now how do we channel that energy into a collective force to really advance the association and all the things that we hold near and dear?
Good. Well, you and I have talked a lot about this course, and I know that you don't see strategic planning as a dry, bureaucratic kind of thing that most people do. And I know you start from what are the core values? What do we want to be? How do you breathe life into this, and how do we make it, frankly, meaningful to everybody in this room?
Actually, take a huge step back. I've got a good dear friend in the room, Steve Dorman, who introduced me to a book a few years ago, which really typifies what I truly believe, and that is, it's called Start With Why. So what is your why? What is our why? Why do we exist? Why are we here? Why have we invested our careers in this thing called athletics? And this why has to be so compelling that it moves people to follow us and to join us. And when that why is not compelling, I think we become the victims of cynicism and all those great things that you talked about. And so for us, I want to start with why. Not how, not when, not where, not who, but why. What's going to be our why? And I think that why has to be so compelling that when student athletes hear it, they say yes. When faculty hear it, they say yes. When legislators hear it, they say yes, that's right, that's what they're about. And I think for us, we've lost some of that why. And I want to use this process to really establish that why. But I also want to use this process to really help us communicate better. Throughout the association, with any larger organization, there are always communication gaps. With the general public, I think we've lost control of our narrative, and they're driving that narrative, and we're always reacting to it. But I also want to use this process to create a compass. So where are we going as an association? If I were to ask you that question right now, the answers would be all over the place. But I wanted to be crystal clear that this is where we're going. Doesn't mean that we won't make adjustments along the way. Doesn't mean things won't change. But we need to be clear on why we're here and then where we're going and what we hope to do. But also, I think I want to use this process to be the conscience of the organization as well. We have a lot of difficult decisions to make, and we've made a lot of difficult decisions as well. And so being mindful of that process, but having not just a document, but having a place where we can go where our values live. But then also restating our values, revisiting our values, agreeing to our values. Because we can say this is important, but if our actions are different, then that undermines the whole process. And so to really begin the process of becoming a values-driven association, and the fact that we have our values established or written on a sheet of paper doesn't make us a values-driven organization. It just simply means we're an organization with our values written down on a piece of paper. But from the Board of Governors to the Committee on Infractions and everywhere in between, we should share that value set. And every decision we make, we should be able to point back to we made this decision because of our values. But also our values come to light when we're willing to look great opportunities in the eye and say, no, because that's not consistent with who we are, and that's not what we believe. And so it gives us that opportunity to really just take a step back, push the pause button, if you will, and really just reassess who we are and who we want to be, but also where are we going? And then we get into the how we're going to get there and all those wonderful attributes.
Yeah, so, we're going to go through this process. Going to spend a year or so, two, whatever it's going to take you. Going to have to work with us. Going to have to work with lots and lots of people in this room. How do you, in your mind, how do you know you've been successful with a plan? This is, you're looking out 10 years. You can wait 10 years and turn around and look back, but while you're in the midst of that, how do you know that this is having a meaningful impact?
We'll have to put in markers along the way where we can measure the success of our plan. So as we set out as we think about our vision, what is it we want to be? We think about our mission, but then we think about our objectives, but what are those goals that we're trying to reach along the way? And we have to measure those. We have to revisit those. So if we say it's important to see our student athletes graduate, that's great. But within that, we have to look at all subsets of students. And we know that there's some sports where the success isn't as high. And among certain demographics, the success is almost non-existent. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to revisit a lot of this. But as we simply look back and think about what are we going to measure, and making certain that we measure and revisit those things on a frequent basis is going to be important. But also, as we think about strategic planning itself and bringing it alive and making certain that we measure success, it's making certain that we can point to specific decisions where we've said, we did this based upon our core values. We did this because we said this was important to us. And so it's not just a random series of decisions we're making, but they're all are coordinated behind our belief system.
Good. So y'all ready to saddle up with the president and carry on with this?
Absolutely.
All right, good. Good. Well, thank you, Glen.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. Okay.
Thanks so much. So, as I said, this is going to involve a lot of work of a lot of people in this room, and we're going to need all three divisions to put serious thought and energy into this. And if we do it right, as we just heard, this could be a very, very successful outcome. But I want to go back to kind of where I started. All the plans in the world don't work, as Glen just said, unless we've also got the courage of our convictions to go along with it. And a lot of times that requires, and this is what associations are all about, this requires the ability to overcome near-term parochial interests and issues and act when needed for the bigger, broader good. We all know this. This is Civics 101. And it's also true that that's how representative, self-governing systems like ours are supposed to work. At the same time, we know they can be really slow, ponderous systems. It is hard to get consensus across 1,100 universities and colleges about what we should do and how we should do it, especially when the stakes are high. But we got to be really clear right now that there's some things we just have to get on with. We've got to say, yep, we're going to deal with it. You know, what we see with that FBI investigation is Exhibit A for demanding action. A coach, allegedly, who takes a bribe in order to steer a student who has placed his trust in that coach, to steer that young man to a financial advisor who is going to bilk him out of money, is disgusting. It's corrupt. It's just wrong. And it feeds all the cynics. I mean, you know, we all saw these stories over the past few months. Everybody's saying, well, who's surprised? Everybody knew this was going on. Of course they knew it was going on. I mean, you know, it just feeds into that. We know it's not widespread like people assumed it was. We know what really goes on in the world, but that doesn't mean there aren't bad things out there that we got to deal with, and it makes everybody in this room's job harder. It doesn't matter what division you're in or what sport you're in. When there's things like that out there and we don't respond appropriately, it makes your job that much harder. So we got to respond to those things directly and forcefully, not nibbling around the edges, you know, not just saying, well, gosh, we'll, you know, do this, we'll do that. People don't want words. They want to see results from us. They want to see action. They want to see us do things. With the Board of Governors and the D1 board, we formed a commission to begin an investigation and do what's going on here, gathering information, and bringing back to this group, this whole body in April, a series of recommendations of how to address the most flagrant problems in Division I men's basketball. That commission is full of really, really serious people. Condoleezza Rice is the real deal. And she and this whole team of folks are working very hard on these questions. Some of you are on the commission or in this room. And they're going to bring forward a report in April, and then we have to act on it. Now, I know that, again, there's no shortage of cynics, that when we formed a commission, they said, oh, right, that's what the NCAA does. Got a big problem, form a commission, yada, 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 chat, chat, chat. We can't let that happen. We cannot let that happen. We've got to hear what they have to say, we've got to digest it, and we've got to act on it. We've got to have real, meaningful change put in place by tip-off next year. Like all of the decisions that we make, we got to recognize the realities of the current environment. We got to solve today's issues, not yesterday's issues, today's issues, but we got to do that by sticking with our values. You just heard from two wonderful people, and three, because we heard from Julie as well. We know what the values of this organization are, but we got to act on them too, even when it's hard. And by the way, what's going on with the federal investigation isn't just a basketball problem. It's not a D1 problem. It's our problem. We got to fix it together. Nobody thinks it's going to be easy. In fact, I suspect it's going to be really hard. But we got to get on with it. And so tonight, I look forward to next April, this coming April, when we have a chance to demonstrate to the world that we're serious about what this enterprise is about. We're serious about this being about providing opportunities for young men and young women to be successful. Not about all that other stuff. We got to put our actions where our words are. And so I want to thank you in advance for the good work that you're all going to put, that you already have. I'm incredibly proud of what this group does. But we've got some more to do, and we got to get on with it. We got to pull up our socks and say, yep, there's some changes to deal with. Let's do it. Let's get on with it. Let's show the world that we got this. We're taking care of these young men and women, and we're going to make the opportunities for them go forward. So thank you for your attention tonight. Thank you for your good hard work. And let me invite Bud Peterson back up for one more word.
Well, thanks, Mark. Great overview. Appreciate your leadership, all you've done. Glenn, thank you. Alaina, thank you for what you've done for us and the student athletes. I'm really proud of some of the things that we've been able to accomplish over the past year or two here in the NCAA. Some things, full cost of attendance, the involvement, greater involvement of student athletes in the governance process. But I think you're right. This is a time where we have an opportunity between the recommendations that we're going to get from the Basketball Commission, the strategic planning process that Glen's going to lead for us. This is a time for us to really make some significant changes in what we do. To step back, as you've said, evaluate what and assess what our core values are, make sure that the decisions that we're making, the directions that we're going, and what we do here as part of the NCAA are consistent with those core values and the things that have made this such a great organization, the things that have had such a positive impact on intercollegiate athletics here in this country. So Mark, thank you for your leadership. Thanks for everything you've done. Thanks to all of you for being here and for everything that you do. You think about 1,100 institutions, 500,000 student athletes across the country. Is that?
Yeah,
500,000 student athletes, and the impact that the people in this room, as coaches, as student athletes, as academic administrators, the impact that we have on the young people in this country is just remarkable. And we've got to continue to work to try to improve that as we go forward. So thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.